For those not in the know, basically the Environmental Protection Agency has decided that a creek that at its maximum flows at about 10 cubic feet per second. To give you an idea of how much that is, the Mississippi River flows at probably over about 600,000 cubic feet per second.
Yeah.
So basically, and that's at its height in the middle of a really good summer season. They're basically saying that because this creek connects to another creek, which many, many miles away connects to the Green River, therefore it's within the EPA's jurisdiction to say that Andy Johnson, who constructed a pond using only the earth, mind you, and some cinder blocks, built a dam to build this pond. They're saying that that is the pollutants that have resulted from that are going to give the EPA jurisdiction to say you needed a permit from us to establish this pond in the first place, and now we're going to fine you up to $75,000 a day until you pay an EPA certified consultant to come in and make sure you fix the damage following all of our EPA protocols, which itself is going to cost thousands of dollars and threaten to bankrupt this welder who lives right out there in Fort Bridger in a nice, very quiet, otherwise quiet part of Wyoming that is just ripe for the EPA to come and put in some of its shock and awe and thereby extend its authority to the rest of Wyoming.
Why don't you mention, there's so many ways I can go on this little conversation we're having. And by the way, I'm talking with Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group. Shock and awe. I played about a year ago. Remember, there was a gentleman from the EPA that was fired, and he compared the EPA to Rome, back in the days of Rome, when Roman soldiers would go up to a small town and just find a bunch of innocent people and crucify them to make an example to keep the people in line, which kind of makes me wonder if that's what the EPA is trying to do here.
Yeah, I think so, Glenn, and it should be pointed out that the person who said that was not only an attorney for the EPA, he was actually the head of one of their regional divisions, head of all the attorneys there. So it's great that he was fired, but that doesn't mean that means that strategy has gone away. It's on one part, it's reassuring that sometimes when there's a big enough pushback, a big enough revolt, that even the federal government is not big enough to keep up with 300 million Americans. That's small comfort to people like Andy Johnson. It's small comfort to people like the Sacketts a few years ago. Their case had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. When you're on the receiving end of the shock and awe, it's pretty tough, but it's still one of the smaller pieces of reassurance that the EPA, be it the DEA, you take your pick of the alphabet soup of federal agencies, they do have to pick their battles. So as a strategy, they've said, and it was admitted, and it was fortunately caught on video, saying that they were going to act very Romanesque, that they were going to pick an area and come down hard, and then hope that everyone in the surrounding areas would just be scared enough to comply. And often that works. Often it works far too well. And I think it's great that I really give Andy Johnson a lot of credit because he's outspoken, he's articulate, and he's done nothing wrong, and he's making a very good point of that. I'm very glad that Senators Enzi and Barrasso are involved. I hope that this does get resolved, and I mean, I know I've spoken with Andy Johnson myself briefly, and I know that a lot of different legal foundations have reached out. Wyoming Liberty Group, we're certainly prepared to help him in any way we can, but the fact is, when you have Pacific Legal Foundation or Mountain States Legal Foundation, both of whom have won recent Supreme Court victories regarding land rights, you have already some of the best in the game offering their services, which is outstanding.
Well, and let's talk about what Andy Johnson had done here just to comply in the first place, which this would open up a whole other can of worms. I don't think he really should have to do all of this, but he did go to the state of Wyoming, said, I want to put this pond in. What are the regulations? And he complied with every single Wyoming regulation to put that pond in. So from a legal point of view, why then does he have to turn and do the same with the EPA when he's already followed everything that, I mean, we're in Wyoming, for Pete's sakes. Why would he have to then call the EPA to see if he complies with them?
Well, again, Glenn, what they're doing is the EPA generally has authority over navigable waters and things that extend to them. It's already questionable to say the Green River is navigable. I don't know whether you're using maybe a dinghy or something at the right time after a serious rainfall, but then to extend it so far as to creek upon creek to and we're talking again a creek flowing at a maximum of 10 cubic feet per second, and it's mostly, this creek is already drainage from irrigation going on, and it's not that he's even hindering you know, it was hindered for a while, and of course that now there's a pond that the water builds up in, but then the water keeps flowing, and by all accounts this is a pristine pond that he doesn't even, it's not even a stock pond, it's actually wild fish that are living in there and his own animals that are feeding from it, and now a lot of birds like to hang out there too. So this is not, it's so interesting that they view this as a disruption to the environment. It just begs the question, what isn't pollution? What isn't harming the environment if this is in fact harming the environment?
Well, and part of what I'm asking is about EPA jurisdiction, which I agree with you. They're trying to. I've sent an email to you with a story about Tuesday, the EPA stepping forward and once again trying to grab a hold of any water they can, even if it's a seasonable pond. So they're trying to expand their jurisdiction here. Does this get us into a fight between the state of Wyoming and the EPA as EPA tries to take care of standing water or even ditches for that matter?
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's many different constitutional aspects to that as well. We have, since our founding, the Wyoming Constitution states that the water belongs to the state of Wyoming, and that Constitution was accepted by the United States government when we applied for statehood. So there's certainly issues there. There's federalism issues, and now with the passage of Senate File 75 in the last session, it appears that our Attorney General has not only the authority but the funding to pursue this and many other extra constitutional or illegal actions by the EPA, and I hope those are being looked into. And again, you know, Wyoming becomes kind of a punching bag here. There's already that issue going on with the EPA declaring arbitrary re-expansion of the size of the Wind River Reservation. That, of course, has many people in the center of the state very concerned. And now you have small cases, you know, like Andy Johnson's here that are dealing with the most minute creek. So it is, they're putting a lot of effort into this on the EPA side, and they've got, you know, while I said earlier, yeah, they can't mess with everybody. They have to pick their battles. But boy, when they do, you're dealing with an agency funded with not millions but billions of dollars, not dozens but hundreds of attorneys who they've got nothing but time. They're civil servants. They will have their jobs until they retire, and when they do retire, they will be replaced with nice, good little do-gooder fresh law grads, and then they will continue this fight. They have nothing but time and money. So fighting back from a state perspective, I think, is a very important step here. I think it's great that we have a lot of organizations reaching out, and private attorneys for that matter, reaching out to Andy Johnson. We have, as I learned last week, we have law firms here in Cheyenne that work representing the oil companies that are in the fight with the EPA over carbon and all sorts of other issues. So this battle continues on all fronts, but it's nice that Wyoming can now really has many reasons, Andy Johnson to the Wind River, to really step into this fight and to really, I say, come loaded for bear.
Well, and you wrote an article about this, and I had mentioned the article to a few people, but it's one of those cases where I didn't want to open up my big mouth. I just referred them to the article. You're more well-versed in this than I am. So now, apparently, we've given our state attorney, if I'm right about this, the power to go after cases like this. Exactly what have we given him? What sword or what ammunition does he have now?
Well, I think the most important part is funding. I don't know if it's enough funding to necessarily hire new attorneys for the Attorney General's office who would focus on this in their entirety. They already have a fairly large group within the Attorney General's office that works on environmental issues. So it's but the most important part with that funding comes the authority, and the authority, and I don't have Senate File 75 in front of me right now, but the authority is very, very broad. It basically gives the attorney, the AG, the power to challenge EPA for anything they do that the AG and the governor believe is wrong. Governor Meade has told me in the past that when are you guys going to take on the EPA? It's really nice that he took that and now has the balls in his court. And it's just a question of Governor Meade, when are you going to take on the EPA? And certainly, I don't think he's been skittish about it, and I think it's great the legislature has now acted. I should point out, I mean, Senate File 75 passed the Wyoming Senate 30-0. Even the most liberal Democrats in the Senate said the EPA is far outside of its authority, not just in this Wind River question, but in many other areas. And it's really time we start fighting back. That doesn't, again, these legal battles, when they start, they drag on for years. I think the Sackett case took 5 years just to get to the United States Supreme Court a few years back. And so it's going to take patience, it's going to take resolve, and I just hope that more and more people, because it's not just Andy Johnson who's getting messed with. We know that for a fact. I just really hope that he's the little guy. He's as little as they come as far as being messed with by the bureaucracy. I'm hoping that it's energy companies. I'm hoping that it's small businesses. I hope that more and more people start really standing up anytime the agents come knocking at their door over nonsense like this, and then just maybe the EPA will start feeling a little shock and awe itself.
I'm talking with Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group about the EPA. Let me. This may be a little outside of your bounds, but I'll see if you know, because I've been wondering this myself and trying to find where the answers are. So someone from the EPA goes up to some small little piece of property, and this Andy Johnson's property is just 8 acres. And when I asked him about the EPA representative that showed up and started writing fines and telling him what the deal was, apparently he hadn't done any research on the property at all. He just showed up and said, here's the deal. Well, first off, doesn't that guy need a warrant of some kind before he starts poking around somebody's property? And doesn't he actually have to do a study with a warrant?
You know, Glenn, and it's interesting because I think looking at the actual complaint that was sent to Andy Johnson, you read that over and it gives you an understanding of just how arbitrary and just how fast and loose the EPA will play. They are, you know, as far as Fourth Amendment concerns, it's not likely you're going to have a reasonable expectation of privacy in a pond that is in, and this is in Andy Johnson's front yard, I should imagine, I should add, not surrounded by a fence or anything. So the Fourth Amendment is not going to be a big protection in this case. But as far as you say, as far as a matter of policy, as a matter of due process, what is the EPA doing making these declarations and sending, and again, the whole complaint that they sent to him reeks of shock and awe. The idea is that we're hoping that he would capitulate, that he would beg for forgiveness, that they would probably let him off, and it would probably end up only costing him, oh, I don't know, $20,000 to pay to have everything fixed. And they were just hoping he'd roll over. And if you're dealing with a larger oil company, things like that, they often will just roll over because the cost of compliance is actually cheaper for them than trying to litigate or fight back. So when you look at, I mean, that's the bigger issue here is fundamental due process, as you mentioned, that the EPA is under basically no obligation to do its homework and to establish a case before, in essence, pressing charges.
Really curious to know, since we mentioned the governor, Steve, is the governor's office going to get involved in this, or the state attorney at all?
Well, Glenn, I don't know. Don't know the answer to that. You'd have to ask him. What we do know, Andy Johnson, in interviews, I believe even with you, he's been in contact with them. Senator Enzi and Barrasso from our federal delegation have sent a letter to the EPA telling them, you guys are crazy. I wish they'd said that, but they didn't. But, you know, you can read between the lines.
It's up to you to send that note, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I would hope, I mean, it would be an interesting, and I don't know the intricacies of the navigable waters under the law, but there is a whole section in there, in that law, declaring certain stretches of various rivers and throughout the United States as non-navigable. And I was just kind of, I would hope that maybe Senator Barrasso or Enzi are considering a bill to declare 6 Mile Creek non-navigable for purposes of EPA. I think that would be an interesting idea to float, and just to see right there. It's you know, I don't necessarily like special legislation there, but it might help send that message to the EPA.
Well, something I've said to both of our senators and Representative Lummis as well, part of the problem that we have is our legislators don't write laws anymore. They write outlines, and then they turn to the bureaucracy and say, now you write the rules to make this happen. Well, what you just did there was you gave these people the authority to write law and grab more power. So that's exactly what we're seeing here with the EPA. So what worries me is, and you're correct in saying this is Andy Johnson, just one guy with a small piece of property here in Wyoming, but the implications, if they can get away with this, reaches across the country, doesn't it? It's not just some small issue anymore. We're talking about everybody who's got a mud puddle in their backyard.
You know, Glenn, the administrative state, or what Richard Posner likes to call government by waiver, is probably the issue of our time. And it's, I mean, I don't know when exactly the dam broke, as it were, but that's the question now. And I think maybe Obamacare was perhaps one of the biggest catalysts. We just learned yesterday that hard deadline for the end of signing up for insurance is not going to be such a hard deadline. And I can tell you right now, revelation this week, in the last few weeks, there's been trouble at the Federal Election Commission. That's an agency we're suing here at the Wyoming Liberty Group, and we've been in a lawsuit with them for about 2 years now. And they believe not only do their regulations, you pass law and then they get to make regulations based on those laws. That's not the only problem. They believe that you are under an obligation when you're trying to follow those laws to understand every administrative action that has happened before then, so that you can get a better understanding of what the words mean. Now, the really funny part about this is what happens when they decide to redact all of the enforcement actions that are going on. Here I have a 75-page report that the lawyers at the FEC don't want the public to see, so you have 75 pages just marked redacted, and this is supposed to be, was used to analyze a case that went before the FEC. It was relied upon by 3 out of 6 commissioners, but now the public doesn't get to see it. That is probably one of the biggest problems. Now, it's not just government by waiver, it's government by secrecy. And the irony of this is supposed to be about campaign finance disclosure, all right? Sunlight being the best disinfectant, but the Federal Election Commission doesn't want to show you what exactly is on their minds. So there it is in a nutshell.
What is the point when they redact so much? I mean, I can understand if through Freedom of Information Act, I ask for something that the U.S. military has, and the military says, well, we have some military secrets here that protect the country, so we're going to have to redact a little bit of that. But when you're talking about various government agencies that don't have any such vital secrets, what exactly are they blacking out?
Glenn, I think what they're blacking out, especially in this case, is the fact that our lawsuit in particular is saying that nobody understands these laws and that these laws touch on the First Amendment, political speech, therefore they're vague, overbroad, and unconstitutional. When you have evidence that the FEC themselves, their lawyers themselves, have no idea how to apply the laws consistently, why would you want the people to see that? They'd be handing our case right over to us. So instead, we just have to guess what these 75 pages meant.
Well, and then for that matter, the case just, and we mentioned this earlier during this discussion, so here's a couple that takes the EPA to court because the EPA actually believes that you can't sue them. So they get to make up arbitrary laws on the spot, literally, just whip out a pad and pen and start making up rules and making up fines, and you have no recourse. That's where we're at with these agencies right now.
Well, you can take the EPA to court now. That was the whole point of the Sackett case, but doesn't really help. That's not going to save you any money. That doesn't mean that the EPA is not going to continue to try its regulatory overreach. But the point is to not get frustrated. The point is to do exactly what Andy Johnson is doing, to speak out, to speak loudly, to call anyone who can listen, and to continue to support people. If you're not in Andy Johnson's position to support people like Andy Johnson, you can check our website, of course, wyliberty.org, wyliberty.org, see what we're doing in this fight and in many others. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is, you know, it's a republic if we can keep it. That's what Ben Franklin said. And to sit here and get frustrated, I understand, but to give up, that is when we will truly lose.
And Steve, of course, being the professional he is, knows how to get that last-second plug in there for the website. Good to see you again, Steve. Thanks for coming on. I'll post some of those articles on my website, too. Thank you.